So I always get a ton of questions in my comments section in my Discord asking what to flip, how to flip, and why you lose money every time, and why certain items are bad to buy in the first place. After flipping for a long time, I condensed most of the important information you need to know down into 6 key points, which I'll explain in this video. But before we get started, please consider subscribing and join my Discord. With all that out of the way though, let's get into it. Okay, so the first tip, and the most important by far in my opinion, is honestly to just play the game. So let me explain why that's the case. So really the first most important thing to do while you're flipping is to understand what you're buying. That's the bottom line. What most people end up really doing is just trying to flip right after getting to like the end or another super early game area, and they have no idea how to find flips for any other part of the game or what people want to buy or what to look for at all, and they just lose a bunch of money. So the hard truth really is you just kind of have to play the game to understand what's good to flip. So when I'm flipping, I usually try and think about what kind of items I would be looking to buy if I was in the market for, say, Shadow Assassin boots, right? If I was trying to flip Shadow Assassin, I would think as if I was a Shadow Assassin on, or someone who just got Shadow Assassin, what their budget is, what they're looking for, and that'll help me better decide what items or like upgrades to put on the Shadow Assassin that might be good for me to flip that someone would actually buy. Because I don't want to put like G6 P6 on a Shadow Assassin piece and have it never sell, because literally no one who's buying Shadow Assassin is ever going to touch G6 P6 until they're much later in the game. So another example of this is like Livid Daggers. If I go to the Livid Dagger page and I go to the top of it, you'll probably eventually see Livid Daggers with like perfect Jaspers and stuff in them and 5 Master Stars. Someone's like, wow, I could probably flip this for 50 mil. I mean, yeah, you could, but who's gonna buy this? Like, just thinking logically, nobody who's actually using this weapon is gonna buy it. Like, if they can afford 5 Master Stars and the Art of War and the perfect Jasper, they're just gonna buy a Giant Sword or a Hyperion or something way better that fits their stage of the game better. The people who are buying Livid Daggers just aren't rich enough for this kind of thing on their sword. So you really should be looking for stuff that's good for someone at that level. Like One for All is a really good enchantment at that level. Combo, I guess, yeah, just throwing out examples here, but like, you don't want to buy something that's out of the price range for the group of people you're targeting for that item. And by playing the game yourself and just learning all of this the normal way, you'll get a lot better at flipping as a consequence. So tying into that, next thing is really just learn the metas. So once you've played the game a bunch, you have to actually know what's good, or obviously you're not going to be able to do anything. So yeah, so flipping really at its core is just trying to sell your items for the maximum price that someone would be willing to buy it for. So for an example, I'm going to look for Giant Swords. And a lot of times when I flip Giant Swords, I'll check for Soul Eater 5, because Soul Eater 5 is a pretty normal enchant for Giant Swords if the people buying the Giant Sword are like ghost farming or playing dungeons, because Soul Eater is a pretty... It fits into the budget of most of the people who are going to be buying one of these, so it sells pretty quickly. Since a lot of people are looking for Soul Eater 5 on their Giant Swords, if you buy a Soul Eater 5 Giant Sword and relist it for somewhere else, like let's say there was one around here with Soul Eater 5 and you relisted it for this much, it would be more likely to sell than something with like Soul Eater 5 and a bunch of tier 7 enchants, right? Because the amount of people looking for this, like this isn't a very meta weapon. Like these tier 7 enchants only go so far, and at this point, there aren't going to be a lot of people looking for it. Whereas a Soul Eater 5 Giant Sword can definitely be considered meta for at least one thing, which is ghosts. And a decent amount of people do ghosts, so a lot more people are going to be looking for this kind of weapon, and they're going to be a lot more likely to buy your flips, which just makes the whole process faster and you make a bunch more money. So learning the metas is kind of goes hand in hand with playing the game. It's really about thinking what the buyer is thinking and not what you're thinking, which is exactly what the third tip is, to put yourself in the buyer's shoes. So this is a thing, this is probably my #1 tip for anybody who's flipping. I think about, if I was buying this item, who is looking for it, right? Or if I was buying for this item, what on the item would I be looking for? So like, let's for example pick, I don't know, Gold Ore Chestplate. So for Gold Ore's Chestplate, if I'm like, I don't know, let's say I'm a mid-game tank, I just started playing floor 7, and I want to play tank in floor 7 because it's a pretty cheap way to get into the floor. So I would probably be looking for Last Stand 5. And I guess probably a recom as well, so I'll search for Mythic. And possibly some gemstone slots. Some things I wouldn't be looking for are Master Stars, because I'm playing 4-7. That doesn't add any value, so you can just ignore the Master Stars, because everybody who's buying this chestplate, like this specific chestplate right here, doesn't care about Master Stars. So I wouldn't factor in the value of the Master Star. That's just an example in this case. Another thing, G6P6, if you're just getting to floor 7 and you're trying to go for a budget setup, there's not really a reason to go for G6P6, because the actual buff that you get from protection is so tiny. Like, protection 5 is 20 defense, protection 6 is 25 defense. That's almost nothing. It's going to make almost none of a difference for an extra, I don't know, what is it, like 4 million coins? Yeah, 3 million coins. That's just not worth it for someone at that level. So if you put yourself in the buyer's shoes, you're going to realize that overpaying for something like this with the Master Star on it just isn't worth it. And you shouldn't flip the items that aren't worth it for the buyer, because then they'll never buy it. I mean, let's say you found a chest plate. Like, if this one had both gemstone slots, this would be a pretty good flip, because gemstone slots usually aren't too much more expensive, like the ones that do have them. Let's see if that actually proves my point. This one has one gemstone slot, but a lot of times it'll be like a couple mil more for some gemstone slots. And you can usually take this if it had gemstone slots and bring it up in price, because people look at those. Honestly, I think people just buy it because it looks nice, but it also does give a decent stat bonus. So stuff like that, you just really want to think about what your buyer is looking for in an item, and you want to buy those items and try and bump up the price as much as possible. So that is the third tip, by far the most important tip. Okay, so for the fourth tip, you should only buy what you're willing to lose. So what do I mean by this? So a lot of times when people are flipping, they're going to have, like, I don't know, let's say 120 mil purse, or actually that's a bad example. Let's say you have a 70 mil purse and you're looking at Axe of the Shreddeds or something. So I'm going to look at these. I'm going to sort by, I don't know, Champion 10. And oh, would you look at that? So I see one with Champion 10 for 70 mil and I see one for 74 mil. I could buy this and it would be a decent flip, but if for some reason some change happens, the admins change how Champion works, they change how Axe the Shreddeds work, if this item doesn't become useful anymore, or if the market just changes randomly, you're going to lose a lot of money, and it's all going to be in this one item, and that is not what you want to happen. So you always just want to be very careful with what you buy, and you only want to buy things that you can afford to completely lose. Worst case scenario, you're still fine. So, I mean, with my 1.6 build that I have right now, I could totally buy this, lose it. It wouldn't be great, but I wouldn't lose a substantial amount of my purse, and I would still be able to flip with the same amount of capacity as I was before. Whereas if I had 70 mil purse, obviously this would be a really bad investment, because if I lose it, then I'm done. So just don't buy anything that's really, really risky, because 90% of the time it's not going to be worth it. All right, so tip number 5 is to account for tax. So a lot of people think like, oh, tax is such a small number, the percentage is so tiny, it doesn't make a difference. Well, let's actually do the math on that. So I'm going to check giant swords again, because this is one of the major culprits of people doing this. So let's say I found this Champion 10 giant sword for 228 mil. And the next Champion 10 giant sword was, I don't know, like 230. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, that's a 2 mil flip. I might as well take it, right? Because I have a ton of purse. It's not too much of a risk. It's still a giant sword. Giant swords are still good. And this is a good giant sword. So I'm not really risking anything here, right? No. Because if you actually think about the tax for a second, you are losing money on this flip. So the way tax works is you're paying 1% when you put the item up as a listing and 1% when you claim it. So overall, it's 2% of the item's value that you're getting taxed. So if I just do 228 million times 0.02, that is 4.5 million coins in tax, plus a tiny bit more from the initial fee, right? So I'm actually losing 2 mil if I buy this, and if there was a flip like right here, that's not worth it. So just a tiny thing to keep in the back of your head. It's not as important as some of the other tips, but just make sure you're counting for this, because when you start flipping bigger items, it does add up really fast, and you're going to start paying a lot more tax than you realize, and your flips are going to go down in profit massively. All right, so the final, and I guess the most controversial tip, is to just get lucky. Like, you can't really control what happens with flipping. Like, sometimes you'll find something good, and sometimes you won't. It's out of your control. Like, there's obviously stuff you can do. You can make a list of items to look at. I used to do that. I haven't really been flipping as much recently, so I haven't looked at it in a while. But that's always a good thing to try and help yourself get luckier more often. There'll always be flips somewhere on the auction house. It's just you never know if it's going to be you that finds them or someone else that finds them, or if they'll even be in the items you're looking at all, right? So age flipping really isn't as consistent as people say it is. Like, you can make anywhere from 30 mil in 2 minutes to 1 mil in an hour with 1.6 bill purse. Like, it's so dramatically different that you really can't rely on it for a consistent way to make money. But if you do it consistently, eventually the numbers will add up. So just don't get discouraged by not making any money. I have definitely fallen victim to this, just not flipping for really long periods of time just because I'm not making any money because I'm getting unlucky. And a lot of times my videos kind of blow that out of proportion because I cut out a ton. Like, I've cut out hours and hours and hours of footage of just me getting nothing. Like, if I'm lowballing and people come with items worth 500k for an hour straight. Like, this does happen to everybody, and you shouldn't get discouraged if you're not making any money, because you will eventually if you keep going, and that's probably one of the most important things. Alright, so I hope this was helpful. I know I haven't uploaded a lot recently. I've just been doing other stuff. I haven't quit Skyblock. I'm still here. I'm planning on making more videos in the future. So hopefully I'll see you guys soon. See ya.